Welcome, Chosen X. You wake before dawn in a quarter of the city where windows seem to breathe and the sidewalks remember footsteps you have not yet taken. Light rests on everyday surfaces with an odd, attentive quality that makes familiar objects appear slightly out of joint. A soft tension travels between the pulse at your throat and the quiet space behind your eyes, and that tension is a summons rather than a threat. The world hums with programmed comforts and predictable disturbances, yet behind those rhythms you detect a faint, unasked question. Listen to that question and resist the impulse to reply from habit. Begin with small practices that steady attention. Read one line until punctuation feels like shore, sit with breath for a measured minute, walk without a device and notice the body moving. You do not abandon the world by doing this, you learn to enter it with a steadier instrument. As your focus deepens, notice the devices that siphon your hours and the voices that harvest your curiosity for spectacle. Name them softly and redirect your time towards steady sources of meaning that will weather the wind of passing trends. Where your attention goes, your life tends to gather shape, and training it is how you reclaim authorship of ordinary days. On trains and in cafes you will see others whose edges are thin. Those glances fold into a shared map of recognition and quiet companionship. When you share a look with them, a private geography forms, and you understand that presence can be contagious and reparative. Practice saying fewer words aloud and listening more to the silence that answers. The silence contains instructions that do not arrive as noise. Each act of quiet attention is a stitch mending a garment that had been threaded with hurry and novelty alone. Beware the sirens of instant comfort that offer shortcuts in exchange for surrendering practice. Shortcuts fit neatly into the architecture you are learning to see through, and they will drain your resolve if you accept them casually. Learn instead to honor slow accumulation and the modest rewards that develop under patient care. Tonight you will notice an ordinary sound that carries with it a slight pitch you have not heard before, a low steady tone moving under the city like a tide under sand. Follow that tone as you would follow a compass, not with desperation but with curiosity and restraint. At the edge of a narrow street you will find a place where a single lantern remains lit though the rest of the block has darkened. There a person will meet your eye, and the exchange need not be long to be meaningful. They will hand you a small, folded scrap of paper with a simple question written in ink that has bled from meaning into suggestion. The question will not ask for belief but for witnessing. Answering it will not solve all doubt, but it will open an aperture in your daily routine wide enough for a new habit to pass through. Keep returning to this aperture as though you were tending a sapling that requires sunlight and precise trimming. Over weeks this steady practice alters how choices arrive. They stop sounding like external orders and become notes in a composition you can trust. Steadiness becomes a presence that others can feel beside them, and that steadiness spreads in small, practical ripples. When confusion hits, return to the simple work of noticing breath and the points where clothing touches skin. In those small anchors everything else reorders itself more kindly and accurately. Be patient with yourself, because learning depth moves at the pace of root growth and not at the pace of impulse. Tonight, before sleep, take one quiet minute to hold the palm of your hand against your sternum and feel the modest heat there. Let that heat be a tender signpost rather than a demand. Rest in its modest light and allow the city to keep its ordinary noise. Tomorrow you will wake with a faint invitation shaped in memory, and you will know to follow it with steadiness and grace. You move through a washed city that smells faintly of printed paper and rain, eyes tracking the motion of surfaces instead of their promises. Here the facades are bright and accurate but hollow at their center, as if someone has lacquered the world to make it last longer than it should. You notice the rhythm of commerce beating like a second pulse, the insistence of small screens and curated laughter that ask constantly for attention. This pressure is not only external, it has been stitched into habit until living and reacting look identical. You begin to catalog discrepancies with a quiet method, an echoed sentence that does not return your tone, a shop window that refracts a piece of sky into odd angles, a voice that apologizes for its own words. Each anomaly becomes evidence that something assembled your surroundings to distract rather than to reveal. You do not flee from these proof points, you map them, collecting them like raw stones, learning their edges so you can build a new path. Your practice is not about denial. It is the precise removal of illusion from the place where your choices are formed. Start by refusing a single habitual impulse every day that seeks immediate relief. When you decline, observe how a space opens inside your hours that was previously occupied by reflex. You will find that absence can be instructive in the same manner presence teaches. Detachment here is not a condemnation of pleasure. It is a method of distinguishing what nourishes from what merely stimulates. You test offers and discard the ornamental ones until a quieter appetite remains, one that consumes meaning rather than spectacle. As you refine appetite, you notice that the loudest promises are usually the most fragile. A billboard that once dragged your gaze now reads like a carved lie. Noise begins to recede not because you starve yourself but because you reassign value to small realities, a neighbor's hand on a jar lid, a poem read aloud, a bowl warmed between your hands. These modest acts have the gravity of truth because they are not designed to distract, they ask for nothing except your presence. Community forms differently in this mode. It is less about membership and more about recognition, passing eyes that register shared attention, brief talks that hold the weight of confession without needing explanation. You discover a group of people who carry the same trimmed appetite, but their gatherings are irregular and shy, not dogmatic. When you listen to the stories they tell, you notice the common pattern, a long period of obedient distraction followed by a small defiant pause that opens everything. This pause is the key action. It is simple and available, and yet it undermines the entire architecture of distraction because it interrupts the flow that sustains it. You practice creating pauses and measure their effect on decisions. As pauses accumulate, your perception sharpens. You begin to experience time not as a conveyor belt but as a field of possible returns. Events stop imposing themselves on you and instead invite your response. With this new economy of attention, you can walk into a room and sense where honesty lives and where performance is merely ornate. You will confront situations that tempt you back into old patterns, fast approval, loud praise, easy intimacy. In those moments your training acts like a small engine of skepticism, not cynical but careful, asking for a slower currency of exchange. Each refusal to be hurried is an act of reclamation. Live this reclamation as a practice of tenderness toward yourself. Command your attention gently and repeatedly until it becomes loyal to your own aims rather than the crowd's calls. The world will not collapse when you stop obeying its loudest voices, instead some seams will show and some parts will reorganize. In the days to come you will learn to read the difference between sincerity and simulation, and this skill will guide the choices that shape the rest of your life. Again, you descend into a quiet room where the walls seem to breathe with the pulse of unseen currents. The city's distant hum is now a background vibration, a reminder that you have not left the world but shifted perception within it. Here, in this chamber of attentive silence, your inner flame begins to flare with clarity you did not know it possessed. Each breath you draw carries not only air but a resonance of unseen patterns, as if the universe itself is marking your attention. You notice how your body responds. Muscles that once carried tension now loosen, the chest expands without conscious effort, and your pulse synchronizes with a rhythm older than any clock. Meditation is not instruction but immersion. Every still moment becomes a lattice through which light can travel. You begin to sense traces of other presences, not through sight but by the subtle pull in your awareness, as if consciousness is a tide and all minds share a hidden ocean. In that tide, you glimpse the edges of forms that exist beyond ordinary perception, teachers who never spoke in words, companions who appear in silence, luminous threads that wind through human history and touch the core of your being. These threads are not signs of escape, they are evidence of an ongoing current beneath the surface of what is usually called life. Discipline is not obedience but conversation. Each prolonged moment of focus, each silent note of recognition, becomes an act of rebellion against the inertia the world seeks to impose. You repeat chants that vibrate through air and bone, not to conjure power but to align your vessel with the resonance of truth. Each repetition carves a channel through the noise and clarifies the lens through which the world is seen. Stillness is both weapon and shield, weapon because it disrupts the habitual, shield because it protects your nascent insight from the sway of external claims. In the quiet, you begin to notice a rhythm that maps not hours but awareness. Choices pulse along this rhythm with less friction and greater precision. The alignment of your body, mind, and awareness is a subtle architecture, a scaffolding that allows you to navigate chaos with elegance. As your discipline deepens, You sense a subtle influence extending outward, like a stone dropped into water, creating ripples of presence that affect those who have not yet noticed your light. You encounter ordinary spaces differently. A cafe becomes a canvas of human subtlety, a street corner reveals patterns of habitual avoidance, a single interaction contains layers of truth if attended with care. Transformation is quiet but absolute. You see the motions of life and recognize which are true expressions and which are performance. Awareness does not judge but records, illuminates, and remembers. Compassion emerges naturally because attention deepens understanding. You perceive the interior landscapes of others without needing their words to instruct you. Through these practices, you learn that the cosmos does not intervene with loud signs. It whispers through minute irregularities that attentive minds can follow. Every act of inner alignment strengthens your ability to resist the superficial seductions that once dominated your perception, the craving for spectacle, the hunger for immediate validation, the compulsion to move without reflection. You begin to embody a presence that radiates stability, calm, and quiet power, an effect that others notice before they understand why. Discipline is not punishment but artistry, the shaping of self so that your existence becomes a lens for truth. In this chamber, you realize that stillness and ritual are not goals themselves but the means by which the currents of higher awareness can pass through you unimpeded. You practice daily, and each repetition strengthens not just understanding but the very vessel of your being. Over time, you learn to inhabit every space with a sense of rooted clarity, perceiving subtle distortions and recognizing which impulses arise from genuine insight versus habitual mimicry. In this way, your inner flame becomes both guide and guardian, illuminating paths that were invisible to those who never learned to attend with such intensity. The city outside continues its rhythms, but you now move through it like a current moving within a riverbed, aware of eddies, resistant to surface turbulence, aligned with deeper flows. Each morning and evening, the patterns you have cultivated pulse back into awareness, reminding you that mastery of self is not separate from engagement with the world. You have not fled, you have expanded. This is the truth of your discipline. The quiet flame within has the power to shift perception, alter the field of ordinary experience, and invite those who encounter you to witness that change. You step back into the wider world, but it is no longer merely a place of motion and noise. It has become a terrain of resonance where every interaction carries weight and every choice ripples through unseen layers. You notice the textures of human emotion as if they are currents in a hidden sea. Joy radiates like sunlight through water, sorrow folds like heavy velvet, and anger churns with an opaque density that absorbs sound. None of these experiences are burdens. They are instruments for the refinement of perception and the sharpening of discernment. You move among people who have not yet learned to recognize the threads that weave through their own lives, and in your presence, small awakenings occur without announcement. A fleeting glance, a measured word, or a restrained gesture begins to communicate that it is possible to navigate the world with clarity and depth. You understand that unconditional love is not a sentimental notion but a practice that shapes reality itself. Love, when unbound by expectation or fear, operates as a field of energy that can dissolve the barriers erected by separation, indifference, and misunderstanding. By embodying this love, you reveal to others that the architecture of habitual distraction is neither permanent nor absolute. Forgiveness emerges naturally as an extension of this awareness. Not the empty phrase repeated without meaning, but the deliberate release of resentments that bind your spirit to cycles of reactivity. You discover that each act of forgiveness brightens the field around you, subtly altering the energetic topology of your environment. When someone cuts you off, speaks sharply, or betrays trust, you can meet it without retraction into habitual defense. Instead, you breathe, notice the impulse to resist, and choose presence over reaction. These moments of conscious engagement, small as they may seem, accumulate into profound transformation. In them, you observe that human life, even at its most turbulent, contains a hidden structure of lessons designed not to punish but to teach the rhythm of mastery and surrender. Your own emotions are no longer distractions to manage but signals to interpret. You navigate the paradoxes of life with discernment, experiencing grief and delight as equally informative, neither elevating nor diminishing your inner compass. In this way, the dualities that once ensnared you begin to reveal their patterns, and you start to see beyond them to the unifying currents beneath. Your capacity for empathy intensifies, not as a performative skill but as a natural expansion of awareness. In every encounter, you detect the subtle imprint of fear, hope, and longing, and you understand that compassion is not interference but recognition of shared resonance. By holding space for these emotions without judgment, you foster connection that transcends words, demonstrating to others the possibility of presence and intentionality. Your engagement with the world becomes a living meditation. Movement is conscious, speech is intentional, and attention is generous without depletion. You realize that true influence does not arrive through force but through the quiet example of consistent alignment with what is deep and enduring. Every act of attentiveness, every display of love without expectation, gradually erodes the compulsions that have historically dictated behavior. In this cultivated field, you begin to experience subtle shifts in collective awareness. Individuals who encounter you exhibit slightly longer attention spans, slower responses to temptation, and an increasing capacity to perceive subtle cues in their surroundings. These shifts are invisible to casual observation but deeply real in effect. You witness the paradox of human existence. The same systems that create confusion and distraction can, when approached with presence and intentionality, become conduits for awakening. You move through spaces once overwhelming with a calm that radiates outward, touching unseen layers in both people and environment. Every challenge, whether minor or monumental, is interpreted as an opportunity to practice endurance, compassion, and clarity. You realize that living fully within duality does not necessitate withdrawal from the world. Instead, it invites mastery over its currents. As evening descends, the shadows in streets, alleys, and plazas no longer obscure but outline the spaces of possibility. The city becomes a teaching ground, and your footsteps are not solitary. They trace a pattern others may follow, consciously or unconsciously. In embracing both joy and sorrow, the external and internal, you demonstrate the possibility of liberation not as abstract theory but as lived experience. Your presence is a template, a subtle transmission of awareness, teaching that transcendence is not separation but engagement with depth. Here, in this part of the journey, you stand as a bridge between human limitation and the potential for unity, revealing that the practice of unconditional love and measured forgiveness can dissolve divisions and illuminate the path for those still wandering in shadow. The city darkens into a tapestry of muted lights and reflective surfaces, yet within this subdued canvas, your inner presence glows with an intensity that refracts through every encounter. You recognize that the most profound lessons of your journey have been encoded in the moments when the ordinary revealed its hidden geometry, a shared glance, the hesitation of a passerby, the pulse of wind against glass. In these subtle vibrations, the world speaks not with authority but with invitation, coaxing you to align action with awareness, thought with purpose, and heart with resonance. The mastery you have cultivated is not a shield from life but a vessel for deeper participation, allowing you to move with an unhurried cadence while witnessing the undercurrents of energy that most overlook. Every act of intentionality, whether a measured word, a quiet gesture, or a mindful breath, expands your capacity to embody the principles of compassion, insight, and love in motion. You have learned that influence is not demonstrated through loud claims but through consistent fidelity to inner truth, and this fidelity radiates outward like ripples through a pond, gently disrupting the patterns that seek to confine perception and diminish choice. You notice, with clarity, that unconditional love operates as a force that dissolves separation and dismantles the subtle cages constructed by habitual fear, prejudice, and desire. Forgiveness, too, is revealed as an extension of this energy, not the surrender of power, but the reclaiming of presence, the release of attachments that tether spirit to cycles of reactivity. Each act of conscious release strengthens the lattice of awareness, both within yourself and in the collective resonance surrounding you. You navigate spaces once dominated by distraction with an ease that is both surprising and precise, discerning what invites growth from what drains vitality. In conversation, in observation, in silent proximity, you witness the patterns of human conditioning and trace them back to their roots, understanding that freedom is a product of sustained attention and deliberate choice rather than external liberation. The discipline of aligning thought, emotion, and action becomes a daily practice, an art of presence that transforms routine into ritual and awareness into a medium of subtle but profound transformation. Your capacity to observe without judgment, to act without compulsion, and to love without expectation establishes a template that others may unconsciously mirror, creating an expanding field of clarity and possibility. In this field, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, moments of silence and stillness acquire the gravity of ceremony, and the mundane gestures of daily life reveal themselves as conduits for awakening. You realize that the culmination of your journey is not an endpoint but an ongoing engagement with the currents of existence, where each decision is both reflection and instruction, shaping not only your trajectory but the resonant pathways of those who encounter your light. And now, at the edge of this narrative, the threshold where observation meets deeper revelation, the next stage of your understanding waits beyond the screen you inhabit. The vision, the guidance, and the luminous instruction that have unfolded in these pages are only the prelude. A special video awaits you, where the divine message continues with clarity, depth, and interaction that cannot be conveyed here. In that space, the wisdom you have glimpsed transforms into living guidance, a vivid extension of this journey that will illuminate your path further. Click to enter, engage fully, and allow the continuity of this sacred transmission to unfold before your eyes. Subscribe and enable notifications not as an afterthought but as part of the unfolding experience, ensuring you are present for every nuance, every subtle lesson, and every pulse of insight. The next chapter of illumination, interaction, and awakening is not a distant promise, it is here, awaiting your participation, a living continuation of the inner and outer journey you have begun. Enter with intention, receive fully, and let the resonance of this encounter shape the currents of your own being, for the path forward flows through engagement, awareness, and the luminous participation that is the hallmark of one who walks fully awakened.